Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
People of Reddit, what are some scary stories from your countries? La Llorona, the crying woman, walking by the rivers of Mexico looking for the children she drowned. Story goes she was a beautiful young woman with 3 kids and she fell in love with a man. The man told her he couldn't marry her cause of her children, so she drowned them in the river. Afterward she went to the man only to find he had another woman. After finding out the truth she threw herself into the river and drowned, and now her spirit haunts the rivers of Mexico as she looks for the souls of her 3 kids. You can hear her scream, "Ay mis hijos, oh my children," and if you are alone at night walking by a river and you hear her, you better run or she will catch you and drown you into the waters, especially if you are a child. Another one is La Lechuza, a witch that can turn into an owl and sounds like a baby crying. Legend says the witch was very clever and would always look for a home that had a newborn in it. When it would find a house, the Lechuza would wait until night time and make the sound of a baby crying, this distracting the mother thinking a baby was outside. While the parents would be distracted looking for this crying baby, the Lechuza would climb through the window, snatch the newborn and eat it, only leaving bits and pieces of the baby for the mother and father to find. Now if the witch was really hungry, it would wait until dusk and make a whistling sound instead to trick small children to go outside. Once outside, the small child would be carried away and never seen again. My cousins and I have actually heard the whistling of the Lechuza many times, and we were always warned to be indoors if there was no light outside. My grandmother would tell us the moment we heard that whistling that would be the last thing we would hear before we got eaten. Tau Tau Emona, Tata Mona. Zombie ghosts of Micronesia. The spirits of the ancient islanders, they take the form of mutilated, rotten corpses, missing limbs and even heads. As spirits they harass trespassers and anyone who disrespect the jungle. When they touch you, they leave a painful pinch or hand-shaped bruise on the victim that makes you sick, and the cure is to see a witch doctor and apologize to the Tau Tau Emona. They also shape-shift into stray pets to lure kids into the jungle as well as possess kids to get them lost at night. My grandparents had a bolt lock on the top of the door to keep the kids from going missing before they moved to America. In Brittany there's a night spirit called Muriok. He's a shape-shifter, but he often appears at night near country roads as an undead horse with arms that beats the shit out of travelers while laughing like a maniac. Basically, to understand French monsters, remember that for most of the territory is scary shit-eating people, Southwest is weird shit-eating people, and Brittany is weird shit doing weird shit to people. On the 23rd of Dec, the day before the biggest day of Christmas, this is Scandinavia, we are the reason Christmas is a thing. Big J was born in August or something, and the original holiday was just the several few days right after winter solstice. One would do well not to be alone. One famous story is that, a long time ago, the family and serfs were going to a several-day celebration in the household one dale over. A girl was chosen to stay at home and watch the house, the livestock, but was directed not to leave for any reason on the 23rd. She did as was told, managing what she was supposed to, but in the evening of the 23rd, Orksmessa, she started seeing lights in the courtyard. There was beautiful singing and she could see through the hazy glass that there was dancing and a bountiful banquet. There were people outside beckoning her to come join them. After all, her real family had left her to rot while they make merry. So eventually she did. She left her house and partook in the fun, ate of the food, drank of the drinks. When her family returned on the 24th, the girl was nowhere to be seen, taken by the elves. There are a lot of white lady stories in France and Germany. Either the lady is a hitchhiker or haunting a castle. My hometown actually has a story about a white lady. This white lady is said to haunt the local castle and old school because her youngest child was walled in at the construction of the castle. Yes, that was a real practice to ensure the endurance of a building or something alike. She can't leave this world because of the grief and tries to find her kid. My grandma is Vietnamese. She told me if you ever kill a snake, be sure to cut its head off and watch out when you use doors. If their partner finds the snake dead, they will hang by the doors, waiting for you to step out. If you forgot to cut the snake's head off, both of them will hang on the door and bite you to death. Sounds cheesy, but I was 8 at the time, so it terrified me as a kid. Well, vampires. People often think that vampires came from Transylvania or something like that, but they came from Serbia. First known vampire was Petar Blagojevic. After his death in late 1700s, a lot of people died under strange circumstances in the village where he lived, and his wife reported seeing him in night. People decided to dig up his grave and found he didn't really decompose, his beard grew and they found blood on his mouth. After him there are a lot of other cases. Also, the word vampire is also Serbian origin. I was hiking on a mountain that is supposedly sacred and haunted. It's in Indonesia. One of the rules: there are no swearing on the way up and nothing we wear can be colored green. I didn't believe any of it, so I just wore a green hiking bag and my friend swore all the way from bottom to top. During our first night camping, we started to hear unintelligible human whispering from around our tent. Afterward, something that looks like a human hand pressed against the tent and repeatedly tried to claw its way into the tent. It continued for hours and we could not sleep. The next morning, all of our shoes, which were supposed to be neatly arranged, are everywhere around our tent. Never going there again. In Australia we have the bunyip and yowie. The bunyip is a large mythical creature from Australian Aboriginal mythology, said to lurk in swamps, billabongs, creeks, riverbeds, and waterholes. The bunyip was part of traditional Aboriginal beliefs and stories throughout Australia, while its name varied according to tribal nomenclature. In his 2001 book, writer Robert Holden identified at least 9 regional variations of the creature known as the bunyip across Aboriginal Australia. The origin of the word bunyip has been traced to the Wemba or Wergaya language of the Aboriginal people of Victoria. In southeastern Australia, Europeans recorded various written accounts of bunyips in the early and mid-19th century, as they began to settle across the country. Yowie is one of several names for an Australian folklore entity reputed to live in the outback. The creature has its roots in Aboriginal oral history. In parts of Queensland, they are known as quinkin, or as a type of quinkin, and as jugabina, 1. In parts of New South Wales they are called gindering, Jurawara, Mingawin, Pudakan, Dulaga, Gulaga and Thalagal. Other names include Yoroma, Nukuna, Wai, Pankerlangu, Jimbra and Jangara. Yowie-type creatures are common in Aboriginal Australian legends, particularly in the eastern Australian states. Australia doesn't have many boogeymen, because we've got so many real things that can kill you, but one we do have is called the bunyip. It's a typical legend meant to scare kids away from rivers so they don't fall in and drown or get eaten by bunyips. They are shape-shifting monstrosities with many forms, most of which are large, dark, and amphibious. Like a horse with the skin of an eel, or a mermaid werewolf, or a jaguar made of leeches. They have a loud and terrible roar but are also capable of mimicking other creatures' calls, sounding just a little bit off. They prowl the river banks and snatch other creatures by the legs, dragging them into the water to drown and devour. Their stories don't get told much on account of how unreliable their description is, and you'll get better results just by mentioning the crocs. Weird urban legend about an evil, mean, unfair teacher named Madame Koi Koi who fell into a ditch and broke her neck after stealing a student's red heels which she mistaken to be her own. Now she haunts schools to get her revenge of her death. Or a bush baby, which is said to be an evil spirit using the voice of a crying baby to lure people away with their loud sympathizing cries to either eat their souls or drag them into the underworld. The Pombero, he's a small dude, black and a nature protector. He also protect pregnant women and kills those who betray him. To have his friendship you have to take tobacco, honey, or alcohol and put it in the middle of the night. He kills those who destroy nature for fun, cutting down trees they are not going to use, and those who fish and then do not eat the fish. You should never speak his name out loud, speak ill of him, or whistle in the dead of night, because this makes him angry. You can get revenge by teasing, and even hitting that person. I live in Texas, so not really a country, but here goes. There was a bus full of kindergartners about to cross a train track, but they get stuck for a while, and in the distance there's a train speeding through, so the bus driver tries desperately to get unstuck, but to no avail. The train kills everyone, and legend has it that if you try to cross the same railroad crossing, the ghosts of the little kindergartners will push your vehicle and leave little handprints. My family is Hispanic, from the Dominican Republic, and my grandma used to tell me a story about a girl named Siguapa, I hope that's how you spell it, a young girl with blue skin, hair in front of her face, and very flexible limbs and joints. For more of a scare, it was told that she would appear in the distance of mango trees. A lot of times families would go harvesting together, so the chances of one straying from the pack were not thin at all, that anyone could just be taken away in the distraction of beautiful landscapes and succulent fruit. Estonia. In Haapsalu Castle there is a story about a ghost which is called White Lady or Valjdam in Estonia. In the 19th century there was a man in this castle, and one day he brought a young lady to the castle, but he had to keep it a secret because he would get in a lot of trouble. The lady put some man clothes on so she could live there normally without anyone noticing that she was a woman. One day, the guards wanted to search her room and they found woman clothes there. Then every higher up in the castle gathered together and chose to let the woman starve to death in prison. But they thought that punishment is not enough, and they then decided to wall her in the castle wall. They gave her some bread and a cup of water and then covered her in wall rock. Then a few days later people started to complain that they saw a silhouette of a woman with a white dress at the nights there was a full moon. And the legend is believed to this day. I heard this somewhere, but I am not too familiar where it originally came from. The memories are still a bit vague to me. To summarize the story, there was a hunter who went into a forest in the night. He found a house or cabin, and he proceeded to sleep in it. When he was lying on the ground, he noticed 4 paintings with faces that appeared as if they were staring directly at him with a terrifying, angry expression. The next day when he woke up, he went to look at the paintings, and found out that they were actually windows. I highly doubt that it is real though, it sounds too cliché to be real. There is also a story that I can verify that happened. A friend of mine had a crush on a girl who got brutally murdered by a friend of my friend. The poor man is absolutely heartbroken over it and still has trouble dealing with it. Despite knowing that she has passed away, he refuses to accept it. I really feel bad for him. Australia for this one, you've got your Yowie and Bunyip stories. But I grew up on Aboriginal scary stories. Kurdacha man. Type of magic man / shaman / shapeshifter from Central Australia. Now I'll tell this story from the perspective of a family friend. White Cop holds much respect in this small Aboriginal community he patrols anyway. Few kilometers down the road is another town, so he's always traveling between. It's on dusk and he's got a call for a disturbance in the other town, and he hops in his cruiser and starts driving. 20-30 minutes into it comes across an Aboriginal man walking on the side of this road and asks if he needs a lift. The man waves him on, so he keeps driving, arrives in town, and now it's night time, so it's quite dark. He finds out the guy he needs to get is already at the station, so he strolls into the back to check over this guy, and he's all sketched out in his cell. Person at the front desk calls the cop over, and as he walks to the front and his eyes widen as he comes face to face with the old Aboriginal man who he had passed ages ago. He rolled into town with no cars behind him, so how did this man manage to get here? They ask what he needs, and all this old man says is, "I want him," and he points back towards the cells. You can now hear this guy in his cell going absolutely mental, not angry, just upset and scared. Somehow they convince the old man to leave, but he hangs around outside the station. Okay, this is where the story gets weird, and I don't expect people to follow and believe, but this cop was driving around this town and he'd catch glimpses of this old man in different areas. Impossible to run to each location for his age. I'll end it there. It all gets hazy, the story. I can edit tomorrow if I ask a relative for the rest though. Here in Argentina, the province of Buenos Aires, in my city, San Pedro, we have a story about a really haunted house. The house was only used by employees of a nearby factory, who were allowed to stay in that house to spend the night if they wanted. In itself is not only a house, but there is also a small forest in which the house is located. Both places are really haunted. In the house all those who have stayed have left prematurely. Why? Something paranormal has happened to them. Among the things that have happened there are cases such as appearances of a woman in a long black dress and instead of a face it has a black hole on the face. Another person says he heard as if a lot of people were eating in the dining room while he was in the room trying to sleep, and when he went to see he did not see anyone. Then there are stories about anyone who sleeps there has very horrible nightmares every day. A relative of mine had to stay a few days and said he had to leave on the third day because he couldn't sleep because of the nightmares, and several acquaintances of my father said the same thing, and also they all had the same nightmare. There are also more funny cases, such as one of the people who stayed in that house saying that once while he was in the bathroom, the rolls of toilet paper began to float and floated to the garden. But the stories don't end here. In the forest that surrounds the house there are also many stories, some of my father's acquaintances and others of other people. One story of an acquaintance is that one night while he was inspecting around the house a forest tree, which they are about 50 meters tall. The tree began to fall on him. He ran to avoid the tree, and then went to look for another person to tell him that a tree had almost crushed him, but when they got to where the tree he said had fallen was in perfect condition. Another story in the woods is about someone else. As he checked to see if everything was okay around the house he began to hear a baby crying, so just in case he followed the sound to find out if it was a woman with a baby and if something had happened to her or the baby. But when he got to the place he didn't hear the baby anymore. Then he thought that he only seemed to hear the baby, and he turned to go back to the house. When he was coming back he heard the baby again, but this time he didn't hear crying if not laughing. When he turned around he saw how the branches and leaves of the trees formed the shape of a crib for babies. At that moment he ran to where there were more people. The place where this happened was near the factory, and it was for that place where the people who were at the time in the factory were, among whom was my father. And after this man told them what happened, there were around 5 people to investigate, and they did not find nothing in the place. They found the flashlight that the man from history was carrying, but nothing else. My grandparents over in Mexico always tell me and my cousins this one. It's because the story of La Llorona. Another thing to note is that there's many versions of this tale. This is the version my grandparents tell, so here goes. So a long time ago in a Mexican town far, far away, there was a beautiful woman who was happily married and with kids now. Their father traveled a lot but came when he could. One day he didn't come home later. As she and her boys were getting water from a river she saw her husband with someone else. She then got so angry that she drowned her own kids, but she came to her senses and realized what she did. She then committed suicide in hopes of being with her children. She is now cursed to stay on earth and look for her kids. I don't remember much, but in Mexico there is an urban legend of an alley, and it goes like this. 2 boys were walking through an alley and saw a dead person. They called the police, and when they came they did their thing, but they thought it was the boys, so they cut the boys' hands off and put them in the alley. So now it's called the alley of the hands. Some say if you walk in there at night you can see the skeleton hand in the sky.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.